All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for continuing to join us throughout the day here at the Lytham Partners Spring 2024 Investor Conference. Again, my name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners. During this presentation and webcast, we welcome Kiora Pharmaceuticals, ticker symbol of KPRX on the NASDAQ. And joining us today from the company is Brian Strem. Brian is the company's Chief Executive Officer. And we also have Melissa Tosca, the company's EVP of Finance. For today's presentation, Brian's going to provide a brief overview on the company, and then we're going to dive into some questions. Before I do turn it over to Brian, though, I want to remind everyone that management is available for one-on-one meetings throughout the conference here. If you've not already scheduled your one-on-one and would like to do so, shoot me an email. My email is blum, B-L-U-M, @lythampartners.com, or you can visit the website for the conference, lythampartners.com/spring 2024. From there, you can click on the investor registration tab and make your one-on-one selections. So first off, Brian, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. And Brian, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Fabulous, Robert. Thank you and the Lytham team for having us. It's a pleasure and an honor to be participating today and really to reaching out to the audience here and giving them a further update on Kiora Pharmaceuticals and the work that we are actively engaged in. With that being said, we are a public company, as Robert mentioned. So again, our lawyers make us show our forward-looking statement disclosures. I invite you to visit the website for further details around anything that we may be saying today and the implications on potential future activities. But with that being said, let's dive right into who Kiora is as a company. So we are a company that is developing treatments for retinal diseases, so diseases of the eye that have a lot of unmet need. We're not going to be a me-too company. We are truly going after novel approaches to either slowing disease progressions or restoring vision in patients who have severe underlying ophthalmic or eye diseases. When we think about this ecosystem, we look at it from multiple different perspectives. While clearly helping individual patients is first and foremost, we need to make sure that what we are doing fits in to the regimen that their treating physicians are looking for and something that they feel will help their patients. And then also thinking about it from the societal perspective, from the payer's perspective, from the regulator's perspective. How do we ensure that we capture everyone's important value-add components into the drug development programs that, again, we are actively engaged in? And so why retinal diseases? What is the big issue with losing your eyesight? Well, obviously, it's massive. If you think about how we interact with society, with other individuals on a day-to-day basis, it is heavily through our vision. It is through seeing somebody or being able to walk down the street and bumping into a colleague, a friend, a family member, seeing a young one growing up. These are the types of things that we cherish as individuals. And unfortunately, as those are losing their eyesight, you can only imagine the despair that they feel in not being able to interact in these ways. And so we take that as really our motivating statement, say, well, how can we help patients or individuals who have lost or are losing their vision regain that vision? There was an interesting little survey done a few years back that asked individuals, if you had to have one disease, which one would you not want the most? And what you can see here, even compared to things that have mortality or death on the end of them, like neurodegenerative diseases or even cancer, losing vision is the biggest scare. So that being said, what are we actually doing to make an impact for these individuals? I'm just showing you a quick view of our pipeline. We have 2 active programs today. In no particular order, the first one being our Kiora 301 program, where we are going after patients with inherited retinal diseases. And I'll walk you through some more details around that shortly, including a partnership that we recently executed with a company in France called Kea Open Innovation to help with the commercialization and future development of the program. And then we have a Kiora 104 asset. This is a novel approach to reducing inflammation in the retina. And we know that that is a very bad place to have inflammation, and it can lead to direct and permanent vision loss. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into 301. Again, inherited retinal diseases are diseases where you have a gene mutation that basically you're born with. And that gene mutation, depending what it is, can lead to complete vision loss. You see here just a handful of inherited retinal diseases. We are starting with retinitis pigmentosa, RP. We also have programs where we're looking into things like choroideremia and Stargardt disease. And then further beyond that, we know, based on the way that our drug works, that we believe, or should I say we believe, it can impact other inherited retinal diseases as well, which if we are successful in bringing this drug to market and showing the type of benefit that we believe we will show, expansion into these other IRDs is a very realistic opportunity for us. So let's jump straight into RP. This is a disease that has no treatment options today. If an individual is diagnosed with a gene mutation, which can be one of north of 150 known mutations, and even more that are still unknown, there is nothing we can do for these patients except really prepare them for a life in the dark. Today, there's about 100,000 patients with RP in the United States. It is an orphan disease. We do have orphan drug designation on this program. And we know a lot about how these patients present, typically in about their second decade of life. So as teenagers, they have a tough time seeing at night or low light settings. And then what ends up happening is as the disease progresses, they lose their peripheral vision. And then usually by midlife, they have completely lost either all their peripheral vision and potentially even their central vision, depending on the specific gene mutation. And again, nothing we can do for these patients. So our program, and I'm just going at a high level right now, is a small molecule that has the potential to restore vision, to give that sight back to these patients. We have done a lot of work across the board, in vitro, in vivo studies, all the safety, tolerability work that needed to be done. And what we did was we kicked off this phase 1b clinical trial about 2 years ago, year and a half ago now, where it was a first in human study. And we obviously wanted to assess safety and tolerability. First and foremost, a drug must be safe, but then also look at different signs of potential efficacy. Are we improving these patients' vision? And so the study was designed in a very traditional first in human study, where again, we assessed patients after a single injection. So these are intravitreal injections, which are a very common route of drug delivery to the eye. And then we tracked them for 30 days, and we're able to test different doses in different patients so we could get some more safety data around higher amounts of drug being delivered. And instead of hearing it from me, I think it's incredibly valuable that you hear it directly from these patients. So let me play a few quick videos for you to hear specifically on the impact that this drug had for these individuals.
Later that week, I went back home to Melbourne, and one of my hobbies is bike riding. And we go out bike riding early in the morning, often leave when it's first dawn or dark. And as part of that, I put the lights on the bike. And, and on the tandem bike, I've always relied on someone else to say, is the light on? Is it flashing? And because I had no concept myself. And I sort of looked at this light and turned it on and go, hold up, I can see that light. And I can see whether it's on or whether it's flashing. And I think that, that was the first time, not only in a clinical sense, but actually it really goes, wow, this is really useful.
That was an individual who literally could walk outside, stare at the sun, and not see anything. It's what we call, from a clinical perspective, no light perception, NLP. This next patient, she was on the path of having severe vision loss. She could still kind of count fingers if the doctor held them out, but she could not even read an eye chart, not even the biggest E.
We walked to the supermarket and at night time, and I walked into the supermarket and I thought I was in a sci-fi movie. I'm looking around, and it was just bizarre because we're quarter in the chocolate aisle, I could see everything, and I could see every individual item, which I wouldn't have been able to do at night time with all the spotlights and stuff. And I could see every item, every block of chocolate, all different colours. But the things that were bright were really bright, and the things that were darker were really dark. So everything was so.
And then one more patient as well.
The thing that was very impressive at the foyer, where you come into my unit, it's quite a small area, but again, I thought the light was getting dimmer and dimmer, and I had to look up and find to see whether I could see the light. Is it turned on even? And then when I said, I thought, it needs to be made stronger. Well, again, 3 days after the injection, it was like the whole area is floodlit. The light was, without me having to look, I could see the light in the ceiling. And it was just like the whole little area is floodlit. And I could even see from the kitchen, I could see the glow from that foyer area.
So these are just the testimonials. We have longer videos of these individuals, and I believe more on our website if you want to hear more directly from the patients. We did test, obviously, the safety, the tolerability. That looked phenomenal. We looked at objective assessments of vision as well, and all of those showed consistent responses with what you're hearing from these individuals, that their vision got better, and that by the end of that 30 days or so, it started to tail off a little bit, which is exactly what we would expect to see, because this is a small molecule, and this does get cleared from the eye. This is not what some other groups are trying to develop, one and done therapies, where we actually think this approach provides a lot of value, because as we continue to iterate and make better therapeutics available, patients will be eligible to actually receive those therapies versus the ones that are getting maybe genetic modifications. The question about their eligibility for other future therapies is certainly a big open item for the space. We also deployed something called functional MRI. This is a way to look specifically at the occipital cortex of the brain, which is the vision processing center of the brain. And what we saw was a quantitative increase in the amount of neural activity when we were showing them different images after receiving the drug. And that, again, consistently, that tailed off a little bit by about that 30-day time point. So the big takeaways from the study is that the drug certainly appears to reanimate the retina. It is doing what we think it does. We are seeing consistency and concordance of different endpoints that we evaluated, as well as clearly seeing improvements or increases in activity within that visual cortex. We are in active discussions with the FDA to ensure that the path that we're walking down for our clinical studies are consistent with what they want to see from an approvability standpoint. And we are going to continue to drive this program forward. We're incredibly excited again by those phase 1B results and moving it into future studies. Now, that data was enough to attract a partner that is is a private company based in France, who are commercial. I believe they do close to $1 billion in annual revenue, focused in ophthalmology. The owners, this family that owns this company, have been in ophthalmology since the mid-1800s. In fact, they founded the French Society of Ophthalmology. So it's a generational family that knows eye care better than most. And they came in, did a deal with us that brought in $16 million on an upfront payment for the global rights to commercialize the program, excluding Asia. We have milestones that can reach another $285 million, as well as a very healthy royalty stream that can get into the low 20%. Now, also of a lot of value for Kiora is that Taya is going to be paying for all of the R&D moving forward for this program, which enables us to secure and leverage our balance sheet to develop our other program, Kiora 104. But before I get into that program, we are kicking off later this year a proper phase 2 clinical study, whereby this will be a double-masked, randomized, controlled study at 2 different doses, multiple injections, so we can see, while we have proof of concept on early efficacy and mechanism of action, this study is going to tell us do we have a commercial drug? And then the idea is take this into a single phase 3 clinical trial and then seek authorization for marketing after that. So jumping into our other program, switching hats, if you will, this is a different molecule altogether that is what's called a DHODH inhibitor. We know that DHODH is a critical node in inflammation in the retina and when it comes to T-cell driven diseases. And one of the biggest T-cell groups of diseases, if you will, is something called macular edema. This is essentially a type of swelling in the retina that separates out your retinal layers. And what that can cause is permanent damage and therefore vision loss. There's multiple different etiologies, or should I say diseases, that can drive macular edema. And so we are looking into all of those in a way to assess, does this drug affect all of them? Is there one better than the other that we can then expand further upon? So we did a study initially in posterior non-infectious uveitis. So this is essentially an inflammation of the retina that is not caused by a virus or a bacteria. In fact, usually we don't know what's driving it. It's typically some sort of autoimmune reaction or response or disease. And we did, again, a similar study where it was an open label, first in human. Is this safe and tolerable? And then if so, are we seeing any hints or signs of efficacy? What we saw, again, first and foremost, this is a safe drug, very important. We did not see the drug really leaving the eye. It stayed pretty confined to the ocular space, which is a very good thing to reduce any potential systemic side effects. And then when we looked at efficacy, we were actually quite impressed by what we saw. With just a single treatment even, we saw improvements in vision, and that correlated very nicely to improvements in the macular edema that comes along with this disease. And so what we are now going to be moving forward with is a phase 2 study, again, a similar idea as to what we did for our KIO301 program. But in this case, we're going to assess a few different types of macular edema and then select one or two of those and move that into a larger controlled study. So with that, we do have a lot of upcoming milestones that we think will provide further value reflection for the organization on both programs. And from there, again, as a recap, we are a small company, but incredibly driven and focused around helping patients with these unmet diseases. Here are some real market opportunities here for us that we believe if our drugs continue to perform, we will be able to address and help these patients. We do have obviously the partnership in place with TEA, which is incredibly meaningful. That at a similar time, we did a private placement earlier this year to bring in some institutional fundamental investors who are going to be with us for the long run. And with all of that activity, we have north of 2 years of capital on the current balance sheet. So we are not a financing risk in the near term. We have the money to do what we need to do, but we are going to continue to keep our heads down, drive forward, advance our programs, and again, hopefully help all of these patients in need.
All right, great, Brian. Thanks so much for that overview here. We've got about maybe about 8-10 minutes left. Let's dive into a couple of questions, or let's expand a little bit more on some points there. So when Kiora presented our conference, again, it was about 6 months or so ago. You had just announced last patient, the Abacus 1 study, completed their final follow-up. You told investors they should expect, complete Abacus 1 data in November. You've accomplished a tremendous amount really since then. I think you'd sort of talked about it a little bit, but maybe expand really on how that data has really impacted your business and outlook going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, at that point in time, we were kind of on the cusp, not knowing, we're about to turn over the cards and not knowing what they were going to look like, right? And we're sitting at the blackjack table, we see an ace get thrown down, we're getting pretty excited. And then we flip over our second card, and sure enough, I'm not going to say it was blackjack, but I'd call it a 9. So we were very excited to see our 20, right? That has enabled us to really drastically change, even in those 6 months since then. If you think about our market cap, we were probably around a $4-5 million market cap at that point in time. Today, we're 3 times that at least. So you've already seen a value growth in the organization based upon the data and the activities like that investment that we were able to secure. That was based really around the ability to get that deal done. So we're incredibly excited by continuing to drive this program forward. We see a lot more opportunity. We are far from done. We see a lot of steps in the near term that we think we will be hitting. And with that, we think continued value growth and frankly, again, bringing these drugs closer to helping more of these patients in need.
Yeah, let's dive a little bit more into the retinitis pigmentosa program. You're targeting a genetic condition that several other gene therapy companies are sort of pursuing here. Talk a little bit about how your therapy differs.
Yeah, so the biggest one is we're not a gene therapy, which I'm incredibly hopeful that gene therapies do come to light and address and help patients who need it. But the reality is, if you think about what gene therapies are truly intended to do, at least the majority of them, it is to replace a gene defect or a mutation that is causing some sort of downstream disease. But if you replace it too late and everything's already dead, you're trying to pour a little bit of water into a desert. Nothing's going to grow. So the reality is those gene therapies are really more intended for earlier stage. As the patient's been diagnosed, how do we prevent them from declining? Whereas the approach we're taking is the opposite. We want to go play in the desert or where there's just a few plants because we can restore vision. So there's even a scenario out there that you can marry the two of these together. Use the gene therapy to slow disease progression, but what's already gone, we're not regenerating with those approaches. We can use our molecule to actually help those patients see in those regions of cell death.
You recently reported functional MRI data for the Abacus 1 study for Kiora 301 there. Just sort of expand a little bit on this data and what some of the implications are.
Yeah, again, so that functional MRI tool that we used was a very complex way to assess brain activity. What we were able to do is take those scans of the brain and quantify them using some pretty powerful computer algorithms. And while they are standard for the course, there's not a lot of groups out there that can do that work. But what we were able to see is not just qualitatively did the brain activity improve, but quantitatively, we hit statistical significance on the amount of neural activity, specifically within the brain that processes vision. So for us, that was kind of a gap filler because we knew the retina could get reanimated with our drug based upon all of our earlier studies. And the patients were reporting that there were improvements. This was kind of that middle piece to say, yes, it is connected, and the vision that they are seeing is correlating directly to that reanimation of the retina. That connection is still in place, and it can be useful vision that is being given back to these patients. So that was really the value, was that kind of middle part of that equation.
Right. I think you probably touched on this in pretty good detail, but maybe just anything else that you can really add to the TAEA partnership and how this sort of impacts Kiora on a go-forward basis beyond some of the monetary aspects, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big company, right? They have commercial sales forces in the US, in Europe, and other parts of the world, either firsthand or through partnerships. This is a type of company that can ensure that if the drug does get to market, that it can actually get to the patients who need it. And for us, that's incredibly valuable because that's the point of what we're doing. And if we know there are patients out there, I mean, could Kiora build a sales force? Of course we could, but right now that would be a little bit premature for us. And going into a partnership with a company that has those relationships with the doctors can help make sure that those patients that are maybe in rural parts of the countries can get access to therapies. That is really one of the big values that TAEA brings to the table.
Right. Let's expand a little bit more on sort of the Abacus 2 trial here. Talk about what your interactions have been with the FDA and how it's sort of influencing, future trials and endpoints.
Yeah, so if you think about what we're trying to achieve and the types of patients that we're working with, there's really nothing that's been done with these individuals, and there's definitely nothing that's been approved. So one of the big questions we had from a regulatory perspective was, what is the approvable endpoint going to be? And so we have been in multiple discussions with the FDA. We now have clarity on what that endpoint needs to be for them to give us marketing authorization. And that's going to be based around functional vision, which is basically a fancy way to say, we replicate some aspect of normal living in a controlled clinical setting that we can then assess quantitatively and show that there's improvement with our drug. And so in the case of our clinical program, we have designed a few different studies in collaboration with two groups. The first one being the Choroideremia Research Foundation, which is the largest global non-for-profit patient advocacy group in choroideremia, because they recognize the critical importance of having approvable endpoints so that we can develop drugs to help their patients specifically as well. But then also with Aura, which is a ophthalmic-focused contract research organization that has a lot of experience working in ophthalmic clinical trials. And so we're actively going through some validation work on these new endpoints that we have developed with these parties. That is being discussed back and forth with the FDA. Once we have our retest variability assessed and figured out where we need it to be, then we're going to roll those suite of tests into the phase 2 study. And again, understand, do we have a drug that is approved?
Right. Bigger picture, eye disease space seems to be attracting a great amount of investor interest right now. What do you think are some of the factors that are driving this?
Yeah, again, I think a big part of it is the unmet need, right? There's a lot of patients that are going blind or have gone blind that have no options. I think the other thing is we're a pretty small space, relatively speaking. We're not autoimmune diseases. We're not oncology. I mean, some of these bigger cardiovascular disease indications, the amount of competition within approaches there are massive compared to ophthalmology. We're a tight-knit community. We've had some really good successes as of late with companies like Apellis and Iveric, which was purchased by Astellas. And those are going after this one disease called geographic atrophy, which is a age-related disease. And they're trying to slow down essentially that disease progression and showing some, I think, early but promising approaches in the marketplace. So we know there's success. We know there's significant unmet need. The approaches that we're taking are novel, and we think we'll be targeting a segment that again, we can take real ownership of and be quite successful in helping these individuals.
Fantastic. Got about a minute and a half left here, Melissa. Let's review the balance sheet, sort of the cash runway. Provide investors an update there.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the TAEA transaction bringing in that sizable $16 million upfront payment, we were able to additionally bring in some new investors and closing a private placement, adding and further shoring up our balance sheet with an additional $15 million. So right now we have cash of approximately $30 million, which provides us great runway extension, looking at about 2 years into late 2026.
Fantastic. And again, 301 completely being paid for right now. Yeah. Look, final minute or so, takeaway, Brian, to wrap things up.
Again, we're incredibly excited by where we are. It's not an easy environment today, as your investors likely know, especially in the microcap space. So the fact that we've broken through, we have the money in the bank, we have programs that are showing a lot of promise and excitement and paths forward. I can't wait to see where we are the next time I come talk with you guys at your next conference, and hopefully can provide further updates as to even more progress that's been made.
Yeah, tremendous amount you guys have accomplished in the last 6 months. Congratulations to the entire team. Again, just one final reminder to anyone that has not yet scheduled their one-on-one with the team here. If you'd like to do so, shoot me an email. I'll get you taken care of. Again, Blum, BLUM, @lythampartners.com. So again, Brian, Melissa, thank you so much for the time today. Greatly appreciate it. We hope you all enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having us.